Recording in progress.
We'll get started in just another minute or so, everyone. We're giving folks time to jump on.
Don't forget, guys, DC to San Antonio direct flights. I want to get Greg to a direct flight when he's in San Antonio back to DC. Hey, Joaquin, we're in the middle of appropriations, except they called a recess. So I'll stay here as long as I can, but I might have to go back to markup. It's been,
Sure.
I think we've recessed 3 times because of certain issues.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. We have you third here in the lineup right after Greg. All right.
Yeah, we're good.
My staff is letting me know when we've got all the media in so we can get started here. All right, welcome everybody. First, it's great to be with many of my Democratic colleagues from Texas to speak about horrific and barbaric news that's come out of Texas last night. Thank you to the reporters, the journalists who were here to cover this issue. Yesterday, of course, we learned last night that a state trooper sent in what looks like an official email details about Operation Lone Star and directives by DPS leadership to not allow migrants, even those who may be struggling to survive in the water, perhaps on the verge of drowning, not help them, to push them back towards Mexico in the water. And there was reporting on children and even a pregnant woman who was caught up in all of this. And so we want to be very clear first about what we have done so far regarding Operation Lone Star. A while back, we asked for an investigation of Operation Lone Star and any civil rights violations because of Greg Abbott's dragnet. We have also, under the leadership of Veronica Escobar, asked for the administration to look into the razor wire and also the buoys that were set up. I know others, and they'll describe perhaps how they've spoken out. I know that I have said that I believe that they're drowning devices. Those buoys are not only set up on the surface of the water, but also have net well below them so that people can get entrapped in them and also can't go around them at all, even to try to save themselves. As far as the razor wire goes, not only is it inhumane on the face of it, but it's also placed along the water in such a way that at times it's invisible to the people who are trying to cross and come over and seek asylum. Remember, these people have a legal right to seek asylum in the United States of America and to petition for asylum. And they are being approached in a very brutalistic and inhumane way. And so we are asking for Greg Abbott to cease operation of his Operation Lone Star until these claims can be fully investigated and can be rectified. This should not be policy or practice of the state of Texas or the Department of Public Safety. And secondly, we're asking the Biden administration, including the Department of Justice and the State Department, to do everything possible to stop Greg Abbott from carrying out what are brutal, barbaric practices. And so all of us have been working today, of course, but also before this, to shine a light on Operation Lone Star and to stop Greg Abbott's practice. And so with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague who represents part of Austin, but also part of San Antonio in the I-35 corridor, Greg Casar. And you'll see in the chat the order of speakers. We're all going to try to go for about 1 to 2 minutes so that those of us who are able, based on schedule, can take questions from reporters afterwards. So please, Greg.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you to my colleagues for your continued work on this. Governor Abbott's attacks on immigrant families are attacks on Texans. Governor Abbott's horrific practices at the border are against the law, they're against our economic interests, and they're against our collective conscience. The news that just came out last night from one of the DPS whistleblowers shows a continued pattern of horrific, barbaric, and unspeakable tactics being used at the border. These all come from Governor Abbott trying to get his name in the headlines. We continue to see Governor Abbott being in the news for his cruelty. It's not a surprise, but it is shameful and it has to stop. These illegal practices, these inhumane practices have to be stopped by the governor. And if not by the governor, then they can be stopped by President Biden because pushing kids back into the water, putting razor wire around buoys to create drowning devices. This isn't just illegal. It is not just wrong. It is something that the federal government has the ability to stop. Abbott wants his name in the headlines, even if it means a child's name gets put in the obituaries. And what these members of Congress and so many people in the community are pushing for is to protect kids' lives, protect immigrants' lives, because people have already died because we aren't following the law, which says that people have a right to seek asylum in this state. We want a state where thirsty kids get a drink of water, not a state where kids are pushed into the water to drown.
Thank you, Greg. And next we'll hear from Border Representative Henry Cuellar, whose hometown is Laredo, but whose district also goes up to San Antonio. Henry.
Thank you, Joaquin, and thank you for putting this together. And I want to thank all my colleagues for being here. I sit as the ranking member on Homeland Appropriations, and my position has been very clear over the years. We need to have border security, but at the same time, we need to respect the rights and the dignity of the migrants that are trying to come into the U.S. One of the things we've asked the state, and I've asked the federal government, are we coordinating with the state? And it looks like the state is going solo on this, not coordinating with Border Patrol, not coordinating with anybody. They're just doing everything solo. As an example, on the buoys themselves, I was sitting down because, by the way, for the folks who are interested in the International Boundary Water Commission, we gave them the largest increase while they're cutting funding. We gave them funding so they can do more. So I was talking to Dr. Jenner, who runs the International Boundary Water Commission, and I asked her, have you talked to the state? Because there are some concerns, and there's concerns that as you put those buoys, the border could actually change. The boundary can change depending on how long it's there, or if you have a flood. I know where to drop, but if you have a flood, that could cause some problems there. And even Border Patrol has said that they are concerned that if they have to jump in the water to save somebody's lives, if there's wire or there's buoys up there, that could interfere with their work. So the problem we have is that the state is not cooperating or working or coordinating at all with the federal government. They're going solo on it. And I certainly stand with my colleagues to make sure that we find out exactly what's happening. Again, we want to see border security, but at the same time, you got to treat the migrants with respect and dignity.
Thank you, Henry. Next is also a congresswoman who represents the border up in El Paso, and that's Congresswoman Veronica Escobar.
Thank you so much, Representative Castro. A few points that I think are really important for folks to make, and to understand, and I associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues. I mean, this is incredibly horrific, inhumane. Greg Abbott's policies and practices actually hurt people, actually cause people significant harm and even death. But I think the context here is really important. When Donald Trump was president, and we know that Donald Trump used cruelty as public policy, even his Department of Homeland Security rejected the use of buoys because they knew how deadly the policy and practice would be. And so Greg Abbott is using a policy and practice that was rejected by one of the most anti-immigrant, inhumane presidents of our lifetime. Secondly, for context, it's important to recognize apprehensions and encounters at the border are down by 70%. So it is, regardless of whether we are seeing historic highs or historic lows, that doesn't matter to Greg Abbott. This is all part of his effort to engage in the most cruel way with immigrants and against immigrants. Third, all of these practices do not make an impact on whether or not migrants choose to cross. It is absolutely not a deterrent. All it does is it makes the situation more dangerous and deadly. And it is a waste of resources. All of Greg Abbott's use of Operation Lone Star of Texas National Guard. I have seen and spoken to National Guard members basically who are whose resources and time and energy are being wasted by the governor. And then finally, I think it is really important to emphasize that this doesn't just put migrants at risk, it also puts our CBP officers at risk. They frequently have to engage in life-saving operations. And so Governor Abbott is not just putting migrants at risk and in the way of potentially deadly harm, but he's doing the same to federal law enforcement like Border Patrol. Again, thank you so much, Representative Castro, for bringing us together.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next, we have a member of Congress who represents a part of the heart of Houston, Texas, and has been active on these issues a lot over the years, and that's Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Let me thank you very much, Representative Castro, for this very vital and important representation of the unity of our delegation. And I associate myself with my colleagues, both in terms of affinity for human being and human life, but also the understanding of jurisdiction. Let me be very clear. The jurisdiction of immigration is a federal constitutional grounded responsibility. It is the responsibility of President Joe Biden and his administration. And he has taken that responsibility seriously, even investing in high-grade technology in order to help secure the border. But what has happened is that this governor has acted with impunity without anyone assessing how dangerous his actions are. And I think it is worth noting that border states like California, New Mexico, Arizona have not taken to this kind of very dangerous action. $4 billion already expended for this out-of-state funds. And then it is clear, and I want to make the point again, that our federal Border Patrol officials have given internal warnings that the razor wire is preventing their agents from reaching at-risk migrants and also jeopardizing their lives, having to go into deeper water. So I think if there's any dastardly part of this, is that a mother and her child lost their life because of these buoys and these razor wires, and one child that's never been found. This is inhumane, and it is not representative of the people of Texas in diverse cities like Houston, Texas. So I have just left a border security hearing, and I have officially asked for the Biden administration through the Department of Homeland Security, the Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner for U.S. Customs and Border Protection to investigate. I've asked the General Accounting Office, GAO, to investigate. Both of them will join the DOJ, I hope, and provide us with in-depth understanding as to why a state has been allowed to act recklessly, cause loss of life, cause a pregnant mother to miscarriage, cause a little boy to almost lose his life, and cause another young man to have a broken leg. I join with my colleagues to say that we must have an immediate investigation by all of these agencies and as well, one by the DOJ, but we must ask for cease and desist. And finally, I think we should just say to the world that America is not inhumane, that we have fought wars, and in our wars, we have demanded that we treat individuals humanely, even in wars, and we cannot be countered by a state actor that is not acting under constitutional authority. So thank you so very much. And we must save lives. And I think this is a very important effort to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next, we have my colleague from Austin, represents what I would call, sorry, Greg, the main Austin district, and that's Lloyd Doggett.
Thank you so much, Joaquin. You know, the fact that every single member of our Texas Democratic delegation is here speaking in one voice is an indication of our concern and our commitment to do something about it. Greg Abbott's border policy has achieved a new level of inhumanity. It was only a few short years ago that we witnessed the horrific images of migrant children being treated like livestock, ripped away from their parents, locked up in cages. To discourage immigration, the Trump administration literally tore babies from their moms' arms. Now Abbott has accelerated this race to the bottom and has achieved an even more disgusting level of inhumanity. Denying water to those suffering dehydration in this Texas heat, creating hidden traps to catch them in the middle of the Rio Grande, pushing small children and nursing babies back into the river, all of this represents a new despicable low. For years, Abbott's policy has merely involved the waste of millions of taxpayer dollars to advance his political interest while promoting anti-immigrant hysteria. But now he is endangering lives and interfering with the work of the U.S. Border Patrol while refusing to repudiate the tactics that he has himself encouraged at the border. It's a true stain on our nation's history. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. And next we have from Dallas-Fort Worth area, who I've served with since the Texas legislature, my friend Mark Vesey.
Representative Castro, thank you for putting this together. I'm at a loss for words. This has nothing to do with border security. This is border insanity. The fact that you would ask law enforcement to push mothers and babies back into the water, that's like a doctor committing the Hippocratic Oath and not treating a patient that is coming to the emergency room to get services. You would not do that. What Abbott is asking law enforcement to do, he's asking them to commit malfeasance. Their job is to help people that are in danger and that are in need, and he's asking them to put them back into danger. That's just, it's unthinkable that he would do that. I have to tell you, when I was back in the district over the break, even one of the conservative talk radio show hosts on WBAP 820 in the DFW area, even the conservative talk show host said someone is going to drown with these buoys, and that this is nothing but a political stunt. So you even had somebody in Abbott's own camp, someone on his side that makes a living bashing immigrants and immigration, say that this was a huge mistake. This has got to stop. It cannot go on any longer. Representative Castro, thank you again for bringing this to everyone's attention. We need the governor to stop this immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we have also from the wonderful city of Houston, somebody who's spoken up a lot on this issue as well during her time in Congress and before that in state legislature, my colleague Sylvia Garcia. No, I think you're muted, Sylvia.
I was having trouble unmuting. I'm sorry. First of all, Joaquin, thank you so much for bringing us together. And I want to repeat something that my colleague and friend Lloyd Doggett said. The very fact that all of us are together, unanimous, speaking together in one voice, surely should tell people that this is not a Texas value. This is barbaric and inhumane, and simply, it's evil. Governor Abbott's heartless anti-immigrant policies prey on vulnerable children who are seeking lawful asylum in the United States. These extreme MAGA Republicans are following Trump's extreme anti-immigrant agenda by putting the lives of child at risk. We are going from Trump's caging to Abbott's trapping of children. I mean, we're getting worse instead of better. And it's shameful that our governor is the one that's leading the pack. Today's reporting of this barbaric activity against our migrants, including attempting to drown babies, deserves to be investigated by the federal government. And I call on the Department of Justice to investigate these cruel actions toward migrants. Razor-wired barrels in the river, pushing children back into the river and denying water during extreme heat acts are just deliberate acts of torture. It goes against everything that we have ever been taught as Texans, and it goes beyond politics and crosses the line into human rights violations. I would call on the United Nations to look at this. I have not, quite frankly, seen other countries even do this. And as we've seen and heard from reports, the Mexican government is already looking at this because, as my colleague, Representative Cuellar mentioned, it could be changing boundaries. It could be, it's against international treaties and border agreements. So these boys by the governor will not really stop crossings at the Rio Grande. Instead, they'll pose the danger that Representative Escobar spoke about to the agents and increase the drowning for our children. So people need to remember, you can talk border security, you can talk, detention, you can talk about all that stuff, but all of that in the end is just hogwash. This is about children. The children who could be your very own little children, your nieces, your nephews, your child next door, your grandbaby. We're talking about children. And I think Greg Abbott needs to ask himself, what would Jesus do? I think Jesus would just be embarrassed and find this very shameful. And Governor Abbott needs to stop this policy now and move with it, with working together and in coordination with the federal government, if he truly believes that he wants to work on immigration, because what he's doing is just something that is not pro-life, but pro-death. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Sylvia. Next, we have a freshman representative from Dallas, who's been an incredible voice since she arrived not too long ago, and that's my colleague, Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine.
Thank you so much. It's interesting because especially in this chamber, we talk a lot about the crisis at the border. And it is always so interesting when I have my colleagues from the other side of the aisle that want to tell me about what's going on in my home state of Texas that I know a little better than most of them, even though they've only had 1 or 2 field trips to the border. So I will say this, there is a border crisis that exists in the state of Texas, and that border crisis that exists is known as Greg Abbott. Let me run down the facts and the reasons why we have a crisis known as Greg Abbott at our border. We can start with the migrants that I've not forgotten that lost their lives, the over 50 migrants that were attempting to cross the border in a truck and lost their lives. That was under Greg Abbott's watch. We also can talk about the millions of dollars that were wasted and lost when he decided he was going to stop every single truck at the border because he thought that that was a good idea. And so we ended up having less food on our shelves. That was under his watch. We can also talk about just the countless people that were arrested under Operation Lone Star. And when Operation Lone Star was initiated, I was serving in the Texas House. I had a number of hearings on Operation Lone Star. And let me be clear, taxpayer dollars are being spent and wasted every single day on these failed experiments under this multi-time loser governor that we have. So the only crisis that I see at the border is known as Greg Abbott. And I'm not going to handle him with kid gloves because honestly, he's not handling anybody else with kid gloves. My colleagues are so nice, and it's probably because I'm a freshman that I'm not as nice. I'll get there one day. But as far as I'm concerned, as a former criminal defense attorney, what he is doing is criminal. If I was to push a child down into water, I can guarantee you I would be arrested. If I was to order someone to push someone into water to the extent that they may drown, I would be arrested. What he is doing is criminal. There are no excuses. We don't have laws that say if someone is an immigrant, then their lives don't matter and you can commit criminal acts against them. That is not what we do in this country. We are supposed to operate under the rule of law. And we hear from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle all the time how they are all about being rule makers and not rule breakers. But to be honest, the only thing that I've seen out of this party recently is that they are lawless and they are constantly breaking the law. And so he wants to be the next Trump. Well, let me tell you, just like Trump is multi-criminally indicted, I need some indictments to start rolling in for this governor, because there is nothing that makes this excusable. And I don't care who it is. You are not allowed to do things that can potentially cause the death of another and then just go away and run scot-free. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Next, we have also from Houston, somebody who has been an incredible conscience of this delegation of this Congress, and that's Congressman Al Green.
Thank you, Congressman Castro. This is unbelievable. When I first heard it, I didn't believe it. And I did make an inquiry, and I had staff to get me an article from the Houston Chronicle, because I could not believe that this could be validated. The article is styled exclusive. Texas troopers told to push children into Rio Grande, deny water to migrants. This is what the records say. I've read the article, and much of what my colleagues have said has been covered with this article. And I'd like to just mention something that the trooper, who is alleged to have sent this information to various news sources, what this trooper has said. This trooper has said, due to the extreme heat, the order to not give people water needs to be immediately reversed. And then he goes on to say, I believe we have stepped over a line into the inhumane. I absolutely believe we have done this. This is dastardly. This is inhumane. This is the kind of thing that would cause us to become the people in the world who are most looked upon with disdain. We don't want that image. It's important for us to speak truth to power on this. And the truth is, the governor is unfit to serve. He's unfit. No person with an ounce of decency would do what this is indicating should be done. If this is true, and I still don't really believe that it's true, to be quite candid, but if this is true, articles of impeachment ought to be brought against this governor. He is unfit to hold any office of public trust, especially one as high as being governor of the state of Texas. You don't do this. Children are at risk. Babies. Governor, you have made a mistake. If this is true, you've crossed a line and you ought not continue to serve. I'm going to yield back my time after saying one more thing. Friends, the Department of Justice should get a letter from all of us. We should sign that letter. Mr. Castro, I respect your leadership. If you write it, I'll sign it. We should send a letter from all of us to the Department of Justice asking for an inquiry, asking that the department use all of its good offices as expeditiously as possible to look into this and investigate it thoroughly. And at the conclusion of the investigation, we should meet again to say something more about this. This cannot be the end. One statement to the press cannot be the end for something as dastardly as this. Thank you, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Al. And next we have our Democratic Caucus chair who's been such a strong voice in Congress and has demonstrated wonderful leadership of our caucus. And that is Colin Allred from Dallas.
Well, thank you, Representative Castro, for doing this. I thank my colleagues for joining. When I read this account, I thought of my own Christian faith, and Matthew 25:40 came to mind. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And I thought of my grandfather, who was a customs officer after serving in the Navy and fighting in the Pacific, and we're in Brownsville, where my mother and my aunt grew up. And I know my grandfather would have never carried out any such order as what has been described in these accounts. And I refuse to believe that this is who we are as Texans or as Americans. I know it's not, because if it was, then my story would not have been possible. If this account is true, this is inhumane and completely unacceptable. And it's also true that it does not have to be this way. We can uphold our immigration laws and secure our border without resorting to these barbaric and cruel tactics. Too often we've seen, particularly Texas politicians, want to turn to cruelty and use our border communities as a convenient political backdrop or a talking point to divide us. But as I said, it doesn't have to be like this. There's another way. Instead of these inhumane tactics that don't represent our American or Texas values, we know that there is, yes, a bipartisan blueprint that we can work towards for immigration reform, one that can surge resources to the border so the Border Patrol can do their jobs, one that ensures that our border communities can thrive and that our economy can grow, all while migrants are treated with respect and consistent with our values. Because this is being done as Texans in our name as well. And I can't accept it. So with my colleagues I know at the federal level here, we will do everything we can to get to the bottom of this, to understand what is actually happening. We have already sent communications to the administration about what's happening here at the border and about the governor's actions. But it's obvious that more needs to be done and done soon. And Representative Castro, I want to thank you for your leadership in particular on this, as well as my other colleagues.
No, thank you, Colin, and thank everybody so much. We're going to take a few questions. I know some folks may have to drop off, but there'll be some of us here to answer them. This should take no more than about 10 minutes because I know all of us are going to go get ready to vote. Before we get started, a few things. Trey Martinez-Fisher, who is the Democratic Caucus Chair of the State House Democrats, let me know that he's in Washington today and has addressed this issue with Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who of course was in the administration, now is the president's campaign manager. So we're taking every opportunity, not only at the federal level, but also State House legislators, Democrats, to address this issue with President Biden's administration. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have our first question from Rafael Bernal of The Hill. Rafael.
Thank you
Make sure you can.
having this.
Are you there? There you
Yeah.
are.
There I am. Thank you. I appreciate it. To my understanding, Governor Abbott has not denied the allegations or fully denied the allegations in this report. And it's entirely possible that he does stand to benefit politically if the allegations are understood to be true, whether they are in fact true or not. The point is that cruelty could help him politically. How do you manage that? Like having constituencies where a significant portion of the population thinks this is accurate policy, that human rights violations are a way to manage immigration. How do you manage that constituency and your relationship with the governor and his party?
Sure. Would somebody like to jump in? We'll open it up to our members. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
All right. First of all, if we look at the population of Texas from north to south and east to west, we have very diverse communities. And many of our communities have a sizable immigrant population. And they also have immigrant populations that are economic engines for our respective communities, such as Houston. And I don't think that it is difficult to explain that there is a distinction between the issue of legal and illegal entry and the concern about that versus absolutely abominable, inhumane practices. As I indicated, we send men and women off to war, and they have an obligation for humane practices. In wars that we were in, individuals have been prosecuted for inhumane behavior. Secondarily, it is not the prerogative of the state or the authority of the state to be engaged in immigration issues. We have allowed the state of Texas, with reckless abandonment, to do this without any guideposts, any walls, if you will, constitutional walls for them to pay attention to. And I think when you explain to the American people that the immigration policies may not be perfect, but that there is work being done by the administration, the Border Patrol is working, we have jurisdiction over CBP, we're fighting against fentanyl, DEA has made some successes. We can tell them that we're working, but I don't think anyone in our constituency is going to be accepting of a baby being denied formula or separated from mother, a mother and two children, one missing and the mother and child dead, 4-year-old injured, a young child with a broken leg. They're just not going to accept that. That's not the bulk of Americans. I'd say the bulk of Houstonians or any other city. So I really think it's a matter of explanation. And we can also say that this delegation will be asking for an investigation in any other violation, as we do when Americans or Houstonians or Dallasites or Austinites or others have a question of justice. We do this because we do this under the laws of the United States. It's not difficult to explain what is inhumane. This is humane, plain and simple. And I think Colin said it and others have said it. These are not our values. And we can speak to our constituents. These are not our values. We put children in a very high position. And so when children are harmed, we are harmed.
All right, any other of my colleagues on this one?
Yes.
How about Al Green, and then we'll take the next question. Al?
Thank you. Mr. Castro, Congressman, this is a level of inanity that borders on insanity. It really is. It's hard to imagine a person being as heartless as to issue some sort of mandate to push babies and children back into the water. I want to have a relationship with the governor, but I don't want to have a relationship at the expense of human life. I can work with people, but I'm not going to put working with a person above the need to protect human life. This is about human life. We've got to protect human life. I stand where I stood earlier. He should be impeached. I know that this is a function of the House and the Senate in Texas, but I am a person who can at least recommend and commend that he be impeached.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll take our next question from Ted Hessen of Reuters. Ted.
Hi, all. Thanks for having the call. I'd just like to know, what specifically would you like the Biden administration to do right now? They have quite a few different levers they could take to try and stop Governor Abbott from what he's doing. What should they do right away? And then also, are you asking for Governor Abbott to just completely stop Operation Lone Star, or just the aspects that were cited in this report?
I guess let me start with that one. I think for a long time, we have believed, even before this news, that Operation Lone Star was misguided, was in many ways an abuse of state funds. But this piece of information and these facts are obviously especially troubling. So at a minimum, he should cease operations on the Rio Grande with the razor wire, the buoys, and so forth, until a full investigation is complete on what practices and policies are being carried out there, and what lives, not only the lives of migrants, but also the lives of DPS troopers and CBP officers whose lives may be at stake. because of Operation Lone Star and how it's being conducted. As far as the Biden administration goes, well, first, the Department of Justice, I would hope in short order, would conclude and put out the results of its investigation into civil rights violations of Operation Lone Star. Second, I hope that the Department of Justice issues a cease and desist order to Governor Abbott on Operation Lone Star, particularly the activities on the Rio Grande. And then we're hopeful also that very quickly, the International Boundary and Water Commission will make a statement that these activities along the Rio Grande are unlawful, that Greg Abbott cannot treat the river as though it's his own, that this is an international body of water, and that he is very likely making us violate our treaty obligations to Mexico, and that he should cease and desist operations. So all of those things, I think, can be done relatively soon, some obviously more quickly than others. But we also, and I understand, of course, and respect your question, I think it's very appropriate, but we also, in asking the Biden administration to take action, can't let Greg Abbott off the hook. He is the one who has ordered these brutal, barbaric, inhumane policies. He is the one who should be responsible for stopping them. So we ask him most of all to stop those. Any other responses on this question, colleagues? If not, we'll move to the next one. Okay, our next question is from John Moritz of USA Today.
Thanks for calling me. This follows up on the last question. Couldn't the president just simply say, "Hey, this is the federal government's obligation. You're using an international river. You're on federal property. Stay in your lane, Governor," and then kind of take action rather than just calling on the Justice Department to do this or do that? Can't the president just step right up and kind of break his silence on this thing?
Folks want to answer that one? Sheila.
Sure.
And then Lloyd.
Yep.
That's exactly the point that I was making. Immigration, period, is a federal responsibility. This is a conflict that we've had, but seemingly more pointedly with the state of Texas and the state of Florida in particular. Florida violating all rules of humanity, along with Texas, and busing persons not knowing where they're going to cities, not expecting these desperate people, even to the extent of in the dark of night, in the freeze, putting these people at the doorstep of the Vice President of the United States. I do think it's important to assert America's values and, in essence, our Constitution about equal protection of law, due process, along with the executive power under Article 2, that this is the authority, immigration is the authority of the executive and of the federal government. I think that would be both a reasoned and defendable position that the president could take. There are federal funds that Texas is dependent on. Some of its prosperity is based upon the enormous amount of federal funds that got through the American Rescue Act. So then it takes $4 billion out of its rainy day fund or more, I think it's more at this point, to use it. The other point is the National Guard. In the years before, we have heard incidences of members of the National Guard committing suicide, being frustrated about being away from their family. There's a lot of challenges that has been brought about because of this action of the government. It's unsupervised, it's uncontrolled. And as I said, there are no firewalls. And so things happen. And if you're endangering our law enforcement, federal law enforcement, CBP, Customs Border Patrol, then Customs Border Protection, and then you're interfering with their work. They typically save these people, but you're making it dangerous. They could lose their lives in the midst of wire and the buoys that are put up. Then I do think it is a federal matter that the president may want to ask DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and DOJ to continue the investigation. But I do think the president has the ability to make a public statement of complete disagreement and disdain when loss of life of children, babies, and others are. I think he'd have a lot of support by fellow Texans. I certainly think he'd have a lot of support in many of our cities across the state, now diverse communities who represent the heart and soul of Texas. I think it could be done, and he would have strong grounds upon which to make those statements.
John, I think in short, the administration simply needs to tell Greg Abbott to get out of the way. He has new evidence now of interference with the Border Patrol doing its job professionally and fulfilling its responsibilities that are federal in nature under immigration law. Now, after years of simply just wasting money, which he has wasted hundreds of millions of dollars while he wouldn't pay teachers, wouldn't provide a decent standard for our foster children, and so many other shortcomings, continuing to put more and more money in this wasteful area. Now we're concerned about wasting lives. And I think Representative Castro provided an excellent summary of the several things that could be done, but it all boils down to Greg Abbott, get out of the way, let us do our job at the border, and don't endanger more lives as a result of your political expediency.
Thank you.
Cookie,
Sylvia, please.
I just wanted to add that we have to remember who we're dealing with. This is not a person who's going to be reasonable and listen to logic or listen to the law or listen to what's good for humanity and in interest of treating people with dignity and respect. He's already said through his office that he is going to defend this policy, even if he has to go to the Supreme Court. In previous cases, he's also not listened, even when the president has spoken up. So yes, it would sound simple to say the president should speak up, but the bottom line is Abbott is not going to listen, and he's going to ignore him and do whatever he wants. And he's got a piggy bank to do it. Remember, in terms of context and history, this started with Perry, when Perry was working to run for president. I think he used to call it Operation Quarterback or something. I forget the name when he started. The state was spending maybe $200,000-$300,000. When I was a senator 5 years ago, we were at about $800 million. Now they're spending like $4 billion. So it's a political stunt that he continues to do off of the taxpayers' dime. So he's not going to listen because it's working for him. It's working for his base. And I don't really think that he thinks about the children. He doesn't think about what he's doing to people and how he's hurting them. He's looking at how it works for his base and whatever he deems he's going to do next in terms of his race, whether it's for governor or something else. You know, we're not talking about an equal discussion here. You know, this governor is not going to listen, particularly if it's coming from Joe Biden. He's part of the extreme MAGA Republicans that have gone again from caging children to now trapping children. It's shameful, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. Thank you, Joaquin.
Thank you, Congressman Garcia. To wrap up, Greg Abbott placed death traps in the Rio Grande and has now issued barbaric orders to his state troopers that endanger people's lives. He needs to stop immediately. President Biden also needs to speak up, and his administration needs to do everything possible to stop Greg Abbott from these horrific actions. All of us on our own will be available in the evening and tomorrow to answer any questions that didn't get answered today. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Record.